Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investments, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives to increase your wealth monetarily and educationally.
This is Fergus Hodgson with the Gold Newsletter Podcast, and I am excited to be here in Asunción, Paraguay. The good news is that there's a group of investors here, and this group is exploring options here in Paraguay that have come from around the world, and I am fortunate to have David Smith, who is leading this group with Paraguay AG Invest. He's based in Panama and is down, and so he's going to tell us about how on earth you get people to come to Paraguay, which is off the beaten track, and explore opportunities. So David has over 20 years experience in residential and agricultural real estate, and he's originally from the United States, but he's been living outside for a long time. So he was just explaining half and half. I'll just say, David, welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Thank you for meeting me here in Asunción. As I mentioned when I saw you, we met in New Orleans last year, so I recognized you. So, yes, anyway, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to your listeners about what we do in Paraguay. To give you a little bit of a background, I got involved in agricultural investments similar to this as a private investor. I'd heard about it, but I'd never really investigated, what was the business model and what were the advantages to that. I was always involved in residential investments, condominiums, homes, just the normal type of investments that people make. When I began to investigate the agricultural offerings, I realized that it was quite interesting in the way that the structure is based upon a hard asset. Okay, so that means the investor owns the land, and then you have a farming agreement with the farming company. So essentially, you could call it a passive turnkey investment. You invest, you buy the land, they do all of the farming, and most importantly, they sell the produce for a nice profit and share the produce, or the profit with the investor. That's essentially the business model in a nutshell. Now, why Paraguay? Well, I've been involved in other agricultural projects in Panama, Colombia. They're all different, avocados, mangoes, aloe vera even. But I was introduced to Mr. Carsten Pfau in Panama by a mutual German friend. Carsten is German, and he's been living in Paraguay and involved in construction and agriculture for about 25 years. So we met in Panama a couple of years ago, and he invited me to come to Paraguay, have a look at the country, have a look at the operation, and decide whether or not I would like to represent his product and his offer to the North American market, Canada, and the U.S. primarily, because prior to this, most all of his clientele, investors, were Europeans, mainly Germans, some Austrians, and some Swiss. So I came down and I took a very, very close look at the operation. I did the required due diligence on titles and so forth, and I was very, very pleased to learn that it's a private, debt-free company. Everything is owned by private equity. So that's a nice way to start. Okay. Now, investing in agriculture. Essentially, you're investing in food. And there's not many businesses better or in more demand than food and water. So you need to find the right investment, and you need to do the proper due diligence and make sure that the company is able to do what the contract states. And I'm happy to say that Paraguay AG Invest and Agriterra, we have a very, very good track record of providing the clients with the land, fee simple title, there's no encumbrances, and the performance of the plantations is quite good.
I mean, obviously, it's an alternative investment. Basically, it's out of the regular market. It's direct purchase or private equity, as you say. Now, this is why I wanted to have you on, because there's a great information deficit, right? Because when we think of regular secondary markets, we imagine that there's this efficient market hypothesis, that all the information is embedded in the price. But here, I mean, there are far fewer participants in the market. So that's why you said you've got to do your due diligence. And let's say someone has, I don't know, let's say $500,000 and he wants to invest in a place like Paraguay. How would he even go about getting started in looking at an alternative investment? What clues? Because presumably there are plenty of, let's say I don't want to say con men, but people with fewer scruples who are involved in this sector. So how do you weed out the inferior options?
Well, I think it's important to look at the background of the company. You know, in agriculture, it's not quite the same as residential development. You know, it's a long-term investment, not only from the farmer and the marketing company, but this is something that is, how can I say, it depends on a market where, you know, there's a demand for food. So you can't just put a farm together and quickly produce food. Whereas you can gather money for a condominium project, and for various reasons, as you say, less scrupulous people will say, oh, well, I'm sorry, I have a problem with the contractor, or somebody stole the money. Okay, this happens.
This has happened.
This has happened, numerous times, yeah. But if you look at people that are involved in agriculture, you know, they're basically farmers, you know, and every meal that we eat, we have to think a farmer. So it's not the short-term type of business profile that you find. That's a big difference, okay? Because when you go and invest a lot of money in land, number one, like Carsten Fowl, he owns the land. So that means he has his best interest invested in there as well. So he only wants to bring in other like-minded people that want to make a long-term investment in growing food profitably. Okay, so this makes a huge difference in how one has to take a look at agriculture. Certainly, you would take a different look at a new farmer that has no experience in Paraguay, as opposed to someone who has a company that has been in existence for 25 years, such as Paraguay AG. So to answer your question about $500,000, I mean, what you've got to do when you look at any kind of agricultural private placement, if you will, this is essentially a private placement investment, and it's anchored by ownership of the land. Right. Okay. What you have to look at is what are the projected returns and what type of financial analysis was put together to make these returns. You know, is this hocus pocus, or is it just the best guess, or is it factual information and also based upon a medium return? Okay. In the case of oranges in Paraguay with Paraguay AG, that is actual information that is published by the Ministry of Agriculture in Paraguay. So that will show you what the prices of oranges are per kilo on the market on a monthly basis. So you see, we have this kind of information. Not made up by Paraguay AG, this comes from the Paraguay government. But nevertheless, one has to allow for market fluctuations, demand, and things like that. So you want to make sure that you look at the investment and look at the numbers closely, ask the right questions. Okay. Another part of this kind of business model, depending on the crop that is offered, for example, with citrus, of any kind of citrus, this is a longer term, 3 to 4 years. Okay, it's not like a row crop.
You know, when I was a child in New Zealand, I grew up on a sheep and cattle farm, and we used to grow orchards, or just basically for the family. My mother had 6 children, so it was necessary sometimes. We would grow peach trees, and they would take a few years to grow, and then they would just go like gangbusters for a few years, and then just peter out. And I don't know. I don't know whether there's the same life cycle in citrus.
Well, there is a life cycle. Basically, your citrus fruit trees will last 25 years. The peak production is about midway through, year 12, 13, 14, 15, and then after that it goes down, not completely just off the charts, but by the time you reach year 21, 22, you're at about 30% of what you were in year 12. So what happens then, and this is also in our brochures, we indicate that at year 25, the trees will be cut down and sold for firewood. And then you need to replant.
Presumably during that time, you have drawn from the soils. I mean, I'm not an expert, I'm not a geologist, but some of the assets or the nutrients from the soil have gone. I assume you have to go to refertilize, or something will have to be done before you start the cycle again?
Well, we're constantly fertilizing throughout the lifespan of the tree. We also do some what they call intercropping. We'll do peas, we'll do different kinds of things just to intercrop between the trees. A lot of it depends on what type of fungicides you're using. Some are a little stronger than others. So we try to balance the use of chemicals and then organic types of insecticides and pesticides. For example, on the plantation here in Paraguay, we use various indigenous bushes and trees that provide a natural barrier defense against insects, such as the neem tree. It's spelled N-E-E-M. And this is a tree. It's used widely throughout South America. It has very small little green leaves that fall off and are blown throughout the plantation, fall on the ground. These are natural defenses against flies and things like that. So we use that as well. You'll find those on all the roads along the plantation, just neem trees.
Every month, for nearly 50 years, Gold Newsletter has unearthed high-potential investment opportunities in metals and mining stocks that mainstream investors didn't even know existed. The value and profit potential we pack into each and every issue of Gold Newsletter make it an absolute steal at just $198 per year. Your subscription includes 2 special reports, Money Multipliers, resource stocks poised to triple, and The Investor's Guide to Gold and Silver. To subscribe, visit www.goldnewsletter.com and click subscribe now to discover how to multiply your returns in today's gold bull market.
One, I guess, immediate question is that, and maybe this is going to lead to how, why there are better returns in a place like this, but is there a particular reason why people would come to less developed countries like Paraguay, more isolated countries? Is that where maybe the opportunities have yet to be latched onto that let's say in Canada, people would have been already onto it?
Well, that's an interesting question, and that is something that I asked myself when I met Karsten. Frankly, my knowledge of Paraguay before coming down here and being involved in this project was somewhat limited. I was aware of the past political history of Mr. Stroessner, who ran the country for a number of years. But I've always been aware that the Paraguay culture has been farming. It is one of the biggest agricultural countries in South America, as small as it is. If you look at the statistics, Paraguay is, I think, number 6 in beef exports in the world, number 3 in soybean. They do a lot of wheat. They do stevia. And the biggest surprise for me was to learn that they are the number 1 exporter of electricity in the world. I did not know that.
Amazing, okay.
Yeah. So to get back to your question about why we're doing what we do, then this was, I would say, the biggest attraction for me was that when Karsten explained to me, the agricultural processes in Paraguay, I soon learned that the Paraguay farming community is only dedicated to row crops. So they do soybean, wheat. These are two times over the year they're turning over. Citrus, on the other hand, as I mentioned before, is a long-term investment. Shorter time spans because it's row crops. You plant it, 6 months later you pick it, and you get your money. But in Paraguay, traditionally, all citrus produce has been purchased from the outside of the country, either from Argentina or Brazil. Brazil is by far the largest grower of oranges in the world.
In terms of oranges, I'll say that if you come to Asuncion, my favorite supermarket is Casa Rica. Have you been to Casa Rica? Yes. And I was just there a couple of days ago, and they were importing oranges both from the United States and from Argentina. So you can tell that there is a need. Well, basically, there's demand for them. My question was more about whether you believe there are more profitable opportunities in a place like Paraguay, and if so, why?
The reason why I was attracted to what Karsten's doing is primarily for one reason. Karsten is focused on the deficiencies of the local market, and 85% of all orange products in any form are imported. Because of that, he picked out a niche market where he could compete in the local market against the importers. So, and all of the ingredients are there. You've got lower electricity rates, lower labor rates, you've got better transportation, So, and lower cost. There's no customs to pay, so he can compete in Paraguay, in the local market, against the importers of oranges and do quite well.
Just in terms of the environment, if anyone comes here to Paraguay, you soon see that it's super fertile. I mean, it's the humidity is crazy, so I assume anything you put in the ground will be growing in no time. Now, one note, you mentioned the history of Stroessner, and I should say that today is February 2nd, and it is the 30th anniversary since the end of the Stroessner dictatorship. So Paraguay has been 30 years. It's a new democracy, but they're proud of that situation. Now, of course, there have been instances of instability, and there is maybe less of a sophisticated or trustworthy legal system. Do you want to comment on how people, again, let's say you're a Canadian or American and you come down here, how you can overcome your concerns about a less transparent and functioning legal system?
Well, that's an interesting question, and the reason why I say that is, I've been involved in different forms of real estate, as I mentioned in the beginning, in Central America for 22 years. I've lived in Nicaragua, Costa Rica. I currently live in Panama. I've also been involved with projects in Colombia. And whenever I'm at a conference or I'm doing a presentation to North Americans, certainly, in the past, they always say, wow, Colombia, really? You want me to invest in Colombia? Yeah. And amongst other things, there are still North Americans who believe the Sandinista wars are going on in Nicaragua. And I go, no, this was over about 15 years ago. But anyway, back to Paraguay. Interestingly enough, I get a very curious reaction about Paraguay, and never in a negative sense. When I say, hey, we've got a great offer in greenhouses and oranges in Paraguay. Well, they kind of look at me and they go, Paraguay? Yeah, I've heard of Paraguay. And they go, but you don't hear anything about Paraguay. I go, that's the best part, because you don't hear anything about it. And what that means, especially in Latin America, is stability. When you don't hear anything about a country, that's really where you want to go. That's really where you want to invest. Because if you look, for example, Venezuela, Colombia, many other countries, there's nothing good that you're hearing about these countries. Or there's so much bad, it sort of outweighs the good. But in the case of Paraguay, almost everyone, North Americans, Canadians, they all say, well, I've heard of it, but, it just seems like you don't hear much. And I go, well, frankly, you don't hear much for all the right reasons. It is financially, culturally, religiously, a very conservative country, okay? And that breeds stability, okay? Now, if you look at the financials, and anyone can look at this on the web, I believe right now the debt to GDP is somewhere around 18-20%.
Still more than I'd want.
But
less than.
But look at the others. Look at the United States. So by those standards, it's pretty darn good. And so that's really, and you're right. That's a very important part of the conversation that I have with all of my investors. They say, tell me about Paraguay. And once I give them the information, the statistics about what, because basically Paraguay is two things, which I discovered when I came down. It's a big farm, and it's a big cattle ranch. Essentially, that's it. There's really no tourism to speak of, and you have a bunch of hard-working people here.
Look, this is my third trip to Paraguay, and it is true that it is a less developed nation, partly because of those, I think it was 35 years under Stroessner, so that really kept it isolated. But relative to the neighbors, right, it is a much more business-friendly or capitalist-oriented country. And that's clear because if you go to Argentina, for example, trying to get anything into the country is mission impossible. But here, this country lives off, I hate to say it, but often things which are just imported, without any notification of anybody, just across from Brazil or wherever it may be. So it is a more stable country than the neighbors. And this is a fact that we know Latin America has its problems. We right now the Venezuela and Nicaraguan situations may be the worst, but there are lots of these guerrilla-type activities, and I'm just not aware of that being the case in Paraguay at all. And one thing to note, too, is that it's 95% mestizo. There isn't really the sort of racial divisions that you would find in other parts of the world. So it's more demographically mixed or homogenous, maybe. Okay, I am always pleased to discuss these alternative investment opportunities because I just think that we do live in an era when more opportunities like this one are coming available. And do you want to just speak briefly, to wrap up, about future prospects that you and your organization are exploring?
Well, we also offer, at the same time as the oranges, we offer vegetable greenhouse investments. Now, this is an exact copy of the business plan for oranges, because in Paraguay, as we know today, it's very hot outside. Right. So sometimes it goes 38, 40, above 40 degrees Celsius. You're talking 95 degrees all the time. So in the case of vegetables, we're talking about red, yellow peppers, also cucumbers, tomatoes, they don't grow very well in this climate. They grow them, but they're stunted in growth. They don't have good color. They're not succulent. They're not moist. So they're in very low demand and low prices. The majority of all of the vegetables that are purchased by the main food distributors, the supermarkets, the restaurants are all imported from Argentina, and they're grown in greenhouses. So Karsten has taken the same approach, and he's growing vegetables in greenhouses in Paraguay and offering that investment because he can compete against the imports. It's the same business model all around. Now, let me add to that, though. This year, we will also be offering mandarins, tangerines, lemons, and limes.
That's actually one other thing to note that, I'll put up on the podcast show notes, just goldnewsletter.com/podcast. Always go there for the show notes with the links. I'll put up a note about where Paraguay comes in the economic freedom rankings, because it also has much lower taxes than the neighbors. So it's a huge advantage to me. I can't stand taxes, as you well know. And for example, if you come here as an expat, there is no tax on foreign earned income. So that's another thing to keep in mind if people ever want to come down here and explore the option of putting some sort of investment or even living here, that it has huge tax advantages over the neighbors. That may change in future years. I can't guarantee the future, but right now that's the case, and it has been for years. So otherwise, I'll just say the website is Paraguay AG, that's AG, Invest.com. And we've been speaking with David Smith, based in Panama. David, I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to see you again. And I never imagined we'd be meeting in Asuncion, but it's quite a pleasure. I would like anyone who is interested to please send me an email at david@Paraguay AG Invest, and we'd be happy to send you our information and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.